I will call the special council meeting of the municipality, the District of Lunenburg, to order. It is Monday, October the 27th, 6 o'clock, and this special meeting is to deal with the What We Heard report. We acknowledge that we are in Mi'kma'ki, the ancestral and traditional territory of the Mi'kmaq people, and we are happy to share the land with them and acknowledge the work that has been done to preserve it for our enjoyment. The agenda is posted. Welcome, Councillor Burns. And could we have a motion to approve the agenda? Moved by Councillor Oikel, seconded by Councillor Hubley. Any discussion? All those in favor raise their hands. Motion is carried unanimously. And we will lodge into the staff report. I will just say that we will hear the report, and then we will have, if there's people in the gallery, and welcome to those that are sitting in the gallery tonight, there will be an opportunity for you to speak. And if you don't want to, that's fine. We appreciate that you're here. But we will start with the staff report, public input, and then there'll be a time for council to ask questions and get clarification. So we'll go from there.
So, good evening, Honorable Mayor and members of Council, and to all residents joining us in person or watching online. Tonight we'll be sharing the highlights of the What We Heard report, summarizing what residents and stakeholders told us about Draft 1 of the Municipal Planning Strategy and Land Use Bylaw. This report reflects months of public engagement, open houses, and feedback sessions held across the municipality. My name is Ella Gindi, I'm a Planner 2, and I will be presenting alongside Rosemary Young, Planner 1, and Anna Giblin, Planner 1. One sec. So this is just a presentation overview of what we'll be discussing today, some background, some project timeline, how we engaged, what we heard, some key takeaways, and next steps. Some background: the province mandated that all municipalities in Nova Scotia must have comprehensive land use planning back in 2018. To meet this requirement, MODL launched the MODL 2040 project in 2020 and kicked off the first round of public engagement. The project has since evolved into what we now call the Municipal-Wide Land Use Planning Project. It builds on MODL's existing framework, since we already have 7 secondary plan areas, such as the Village of Hebville, Black House, and Riverport. And we also have the coastal protection regulations, cluster development regulations, and the subdivision regulations. When Draft 1 was released in March 2025, it drew a strong public reaction and a lot of concern. In response, Council made the decision to pause Draft 1, direct staff to expand engagement, and prepared a What We Heard report to influence the development of Draft 2. The purpose and objective of this project, as mandated in the Municipal Government Act, is to create 2 documents. One, a municipal planning strategy, and a land use bylaw for all unzoned lands in MODL. These documents will guide growth and development for the next several decades. The municipal planning strategy and land use bylaw must also meet provincial meaning planning requirements under the Municipal Government Act. That also means addressing the 5 statements of provincial interests, such as drinking water, flood risk, agricultural land, infrastructure, and housing. How will the What We Heard report be used? This report serves as a bridge between Draft 1 and Draft 2. It compiles key community feedback that will guide Council's direction on where revisions and clarifications are most needed, particularly around housing, agriculture, and environmental protection. This is a project timeline. So as I mentioned before, the project started in 2020 with initial engagement in around 2020-21. We released Draft 1 in March of 2025, And today we're here after public engagement. The What We Heard report has been released in October 2025. We're presenting it here today, and we'll start working after Council's direction on draft 2 in winter 2026, and also an engagement around that time as well. So how we engaged. This phase of engagement focused on informing residents about the provincial requirement, identifying concerns with draft 1, and understanding community values to guide the next draft. This is an engagement snapshot of all the engagement we've done. Engagement that reached residents through a wide range of platforms and events. We ran radio and newspaper ads and shared regular updates on social media, all directing people to the Engage MODL webpage, which reached over 12,000 visits. To increase awareness about this, 3 postcards were mailed to households across the municipality. In total, we hosted 22 engagement events, including 12 open houses, 7 Thursday drop-ins, 2 online sessions, and 4 stakeholder meetings, along with additional outreach at the South Shore Expo, New Germany, Community Cafe, and 4 farm visits. Across all activities, there were over 850 in-person attendances, over 2,000 feedback frame responses, and 359 survey submissions, showing strong and diverse participation across the municipality. And these are tables that just shows you about the community open houses events that we did and the number of participants in each event. So the analysis approach that we took, the report combined input from residents and stakeholders using a mixed method approach, meaning we used both qualitative and quantitative analysis. Qualitative analysis focused on words and meaning. It's about understanding what people said and why. We used thematic coding to analyze written feedback from surveys, open houses, email submissions. That means we looked for major reoccurring themes and sub-themes, reading each comment and tagging it by topic. So for example, housing, agriculture, environment, and zoning clarity. And then grouping those tags to find patterns across the municipality. So for example, we could link themes like housing and RVs, or for example, agriculture and animal count. The quantitative analysis, on the other hand, focused on numbers and measurable data. We used tools like the feedback frames tokens to see how strongly participated, supported, or opposed specific ideas. Together, this mixed method approach gave us a balanced understanding of community priorities that helped identify both the key themes and their relative importance for draft 2. There are some data limitations. So participation was self-selected. So the finding reflect engaged voices rather than a representative sample. So just for example of what it means that some participants may attend several community events. Some tools like feedback frames were introduced later in the process, which may have also influenced the type of input we received in different locations. We also recognize barriers to participation for some residents, including accessibility issues and the timing of sessions during busy seasons. And finally, Indigenous perspectives were not captured, which is an important gap to address in future engagement. Even with these limitations, the feedback provides valuable insight into community priorities. And I'll now turn it over to Rosemary and Anna, who will walk us through the key findings from the What We Heard report.
So now we're going to transition into sharing what we heard about the project throughout all of the engagement activities over the past couple of months. As Ella mentioned, this section of the presentation is organized into the major themes that emerged from our analysis of the data. We identified 9 major themes, all of which are presented on the slide. The themes are not presented in a particular order, but it is worth noting that the habitation of RVs, the proposed livestock regulations, and the regulations around home-based businesses were key sticking points for residents. And over the next few minutes, we'll spend time explaining what we heard on each topic from residents and from stakeholders where applicable. As a reminder, we had 4 stakeholder meetings throughout this engagement period. We had a session with housing stakeholders, a session with agricultural stakeholders, environmental stakeholders, and stakeholders from the development world and real estate industry. We'll discuss the findings from these sessions throughout the presentation, noting that we did not hold a stakeholder session for each theme. And when describing what we heard from residents throughout the presentation, we are referring to the survey data, the open house data, so feedback frames, comments on sticky notes, emails, social media, and any other submissions that were dropped off at the municipal office. And I'll also note that this is just an overview. Of course, there's much more detail in the report itself, and we'll be able to dive more into the different topics in workshops with Council in November. So for our first theme, we received a lot of general commentary about planning as a concept and the municipality's approach to planning. We heard loud and clear that people were unhappy with the regulations proposed in Draft 1. Many people felt that the regulations in the first draft represented government overreach. Residents were concerned about how planning would impact their property rights and their sense of personal freedom. Much of the opposition reflected apprehension towards urban-style planning and worry about losing the rural lifestyle that people hold dear. Fear of change and also confusion around what planning entails factored into the resistance and the criticisms we heard, and consequently there were calls for more transparent engagement with locals and an approach that aligns more with Modal's rural nature. Put simply, we heard time and time again that people valued self-sufficiency, autonomy, and independence. At the same time, we also heard that residents want to live in a community-oriented place where there is trust and mutual respect and where neighbors can resolve issues and rely on one another. When asked about the future of MODL, many envisioned a supportive community where elderly are taken care of and where youth want to stay. And although opposition to Draft 1 was a resounding theme, we did notice some variation in how people express their frustration. So we heard from some that planning should not exist in MODL at all. We heard from some that they only wanted the bare minimum of the regulations required by the province. And we also heard from some that wanted minimal regulations, but regulations to address very specific land use conflicts that they've experienced in their community. And people's perspectives on agriculture also reflected widespread concern about losing the rural way of life. So from residents, we heard strong opposition to the proposed livestock regulations. Many highlighted the importance of allowing homesteading and small-scale agriculture for food security and sustainable livelihoods. People felt that regulating the number of livestock on a property, for example, the general provision on the number of chickens, was excessive and unnecessary, particularly in rural areas. We also did hear some concerns about fencing, pests, odor, and noise, and a few comments about the importance of animal welfare, though these concerns were typically referring to livestock in residential neighborhoods. And generally, we heard significant support for protecting farmland from development, noting that it's an important part of the fabric of our municipality and also critical for food security. However, we heard different perspectives from residents on how this could be achieved. This slide displays one of the feedback frames we had at many of the open houses. Out of 179 participants, so 179 tokens, more than 80% agreed to some extent that agricultural land should be protected, even if it means limiting the number of new lots that can be created in the future. And this slide showcases another feedback frame. Almost 70% of 173 participants or tokens agreed that the municipality should not regulate the number of livestock allowed per lot in rural areas, but should consider regulating them in higher density residential developments. And the quotes on this slide just demonstrate some of the varied perspectives we heard on these livestock regulations, and I'll just pause for a moment so you can read them. On June 25th, we hosted a meeting with 10 agricultural stakeholders. The stakeholders were mainly local farmers with operations of various types and sizes. And in this session, we heard many concerns about the loss of productive agricultural land to development, particularly active farmland and drumland soils. There were also frequent mentions about farms now surrounded by residential uses and how some of the farmers that own these properties are the last of their generation. So there was curiosity about how we would zone these to balance protection while also ensuring flexibility for those farmers who may not have anyone to pass their farm onto after them. And some residents have also noticed increasing land use conflicts between agricultural and non-agricultural uses. In this session, we also heard mixed perspectives on whether it would make sense to require new manure storage facilities and livestock barns to be set back from nearby houses or watercourses. Some of the stakeholders felt that municipal setbacks could help to ensure that non-registered farms are not polluting local waterways. We heard general support for setbacks for new residential uses, and we also heard from these stakeholders that it's important to consider the cumulative environmental impacts of allowing livestock in high-density residential areas. But the key message from this stakeholder session was that it's important not to bite the hand that feeds us. Flexible regulations are very crucial for this sector, especially as they are feeling the weight of regulations from other levels of government. Environment was another theme that we identified. So many residents emphasized the need to protect the natural environment of MODL, including our forests, habitats, watersheds, coastline, and wetlands. Residents were especially concerned with the impact of development on water resources, and protecting lakes and the coast were cited as important for different reasons. But particularly, we saw a lot of mention about the importance of protecting lakes from a water quality perspective and ensuring we all have access to clean water. We also heard mixed views on climate change throughout the engagement. So we heard some calls to mitigate and adapt to climate change through planning, whereas we also heard some people comment on climate change as a hoax or that climate change was part of a political agenda. So we put out 2 feedback frame statements about the environment for people to react to at some of the open houses. The first asked people to indicate the extent to which they agree with the following statement. It is important to apply rules to limit development around lakes, rivers, and wetlands. As shown on the slide, 63% of the 177 participants strongly agreed with this statement. The second statement was, development around the lakes that supply drinking water to the nearby towns should be restricted. Approximately 70% of the 182 participants strongly agreed with this statement. And on July 23rd, we hosted a meeting with 10 stakeholders from the environmental sector. This session was attended by a variety of representatives from environmental organizations, and we heard generally that the lack of land use regulation in Modal has inflated the value of sensitive lands, especially along the coast, making conservation acquisitions more difficult. Stronger zoning and municipal policies could help to rebalance land value with ecological priorities. Stakeholders also argued that industrial and livestock uses could have stricter setbacks from watercourses than residential or recreational uses. And finally, we heard that there's a need for greater municipal leadership via conservation policies, partnerships with environmental organizations, and an evidence-based policy.
Okay, so moving on to housing, which was identified as another major key theme throughout engagement. So overall, there was a clear need for more diverse, affordable, and accessible housing options. Residents indicated through the public input survey that they want housing options such as co-ops, tiny homes, cluster housing, off-grid living, and mixed income housing to be supported. There was a call for flexible land use regulations that support a variety of housing options. Many indicated their support for full-time RV living, while others expressed concerns related to septic and garbage. Some expressed support for having specific regulations for campgrounds and RV parks. This was specifically seen through the feedback frame results. We also heard some concerns over short-term rentals and their impact on neighboring properties and changing the rural character of the municipality. So one of the feedback frame statements that we had at the engagement sessions presented the following statement. There should be specific regulations for campgrounds and RV parks to minimize the impacts on things such as neighboring properties and the environment. This feedback frame had 182 participants, and of that, about 88% agreed that there should be regulations for campgrounds and RV parks. However, comments specified that regulations should be balanced, evidence-based, and context-specific. One person shared the quote, "Campgrounds and RV parks are a must, but not to negatively impact community residents." There was another feedback frame statement which said, "People should be allowed to live in a recreational vehicle year-round as long as there is an appropriate system for disposing of sewage." From 184 participants, about 60% indicated agreement that people should be allowed to live in an RV year-round, with many acknowledging the existing housing crisis. However, some pointed out potential issues associated with RV living, including septic and garbage, as well as visual aesthetics and unfair taxation. These two quotes on the right here highlight these contrasting views. So one person said, "Absolutely not, especially where there are many such vehicles on one property with no environmental controls." While another person said, "For most young people, traditional housing and renting is not affordable." So on July 16th, we had a housing stakeholder event that had 4 participants from local housing organizations. They indicated a need for policies that help to manage surplus land, to have stronger partnerships with external nonprofit groups, and clear development guidance from the municipality. They expressed an urgent need for attainable housing, diverse housing options, providing better guidance for development, and improving municipal advocacy on housing. Many agreed that there needs to be support for diverse housing options, including transitional housing, secondary suites, and designs based on universal accessibility. Some noted the negative stigma around affordable housing options such as RVs and tiny homes. And finally, the need for municipal policy to be paired with practical tools such as donating or helping to facilitate the transfer of surplus land for housing. So moving on to transportation and infrastructure, which were other major themes, first starting with transportation. So across the engagement, there was a strong interest in improving rural, affordable, and accessible transportation options. Some mentioned expanding rural bus services and having more pedestrian and active transportation infrastructure, such as bike lanes and sidewalks to better connect communities. We did hear a lot of feedback on other transportation-related topics like roads, but they fall outside of the scope of this project and are often not under municipal jurisdiction. So for infrastructure feedback, there were calls for intentional and strategic infrastructure planning to ensure that amenities and services keep pace with new development, including the expansion of municipally serviced areas and improved stormwater management to prevent flooding and environmental impacts. Some residents expressed concern that the pace and scale of development could strain existing infrastructure, groundwater supplies, and other environmental systems. Many emphasized the need for balanced growth that aligns with available services and fair distribution of development costs, as to not burden the residents that will not benefit from new infrastructure projects. So economic development was key theme number 6, and this was identified as a major theme throughout the engagement period, and this specifically relates to small local businesses as well as home-based businesses. So overall, there was strong support for small locally owned businesses with specific emphasis on agriculturally related businesses and farm stands. When analyzing the feedback gathered across all engagement methods, many opposed the regulation of home-based businesses. However, input gathered specifically through the feedback frames showed a mix of perspectives on this, with several preferring a case-by-case approach to addressing land use conflicts. We will look at these results a bit closer in 2 slides. Some expressed their concern about overregulation, particularly regarding general zoning and the potential impact on existing businesses. Some raised concerns about the environment and community impacts from large corporations, mineral extraction operations, and RV parks and campgrounds. Tourism was identified as an opportunity to promote local art, green infrastructure, and to preserve community character. Some also indicated concerns about short-term rentals and the impact of these ventures on the housing market. So one of the feedback frame statements related to home-based businesses. It read, home-based businesses should be regulated in some residential zones to protect neighborhood character and limit impacts on nearby residents. These results from 162 participants showed mixed views on the regulation of home-based businesses in residential areas. This somewhat contradicts the findings from the overall feedback. This pie chart shows almost equal proportions for each stance, from some strongly agreeing that home-based businesses should be regulated in residential areas to others strongly disagreeing that they should be regulated in residential areas. Some comments on this said that regulations for home-based businesses should be by a case-by-case basis, as the nature of the business can really matter. These two quotes help to illustrate the conflicting views. So one person said, home-based businesses should be regulated to ensure adequate parking that doesn't interfere on residents in area or impede traffic laws. While someone else said, home-based businesses are a backbone. Our businesses are out of homes are what support our economies. Tread lightly. As mentioned earlier, when looking at these combined feedback, many residents were in opposition to the regulation of home-based businesses. It's important to recognize, however, that the strong reactions on this topic may have stemmed from an understanding that the home-based business regulations of draft number 1 applied to all areas of the municipality instead of certain residential zones as proposed. In summary, though, we heard loud and clear that residents want home-based businesses to be supported and to not be overregulated going forward. So there was another feedback frame statement regarding limiting new commercial uses on private roads. So of 158 participants, almost half, at 47%, agreed that new commercial uses should be regulated on private roads, but again, mixed views on this topic, with a quarter being neutral and about 21% in disagreement. Some said it depends on the type of use, with one resident saying, it depends on commercial uses. It might be decided with community for each case. Automobile dealership may be more difficult to accept than an art gallery. While another person said, there should be no additional limits. This is a private road. So moving on to public spaces and culture, which was identified as another major theme. There was strong emphasis on protecting public spaces and natural assets from overdevelopment or privatization, ensuring they remain accessible for locals and tourists. There was desire for more community hubs, including community gardens, as well as investing in existing parks. There was general support for parkland dedication in new developments, though feedback frame results showed mixed views on increasing subdivision fees. The feedback frame results also showed that there was mixed views, with many opposing changing municipal property or place names to address historical injustices. So we'll dive into that one a little bit on this slide here. So we had the statement presented at engagement, which read the following: we should look at municipal properties or location names that may be outdated or harmful in order to implement reconciliation and address historical injustices. There were overall mixed views on this statement, with 165 participants. Some agreed that harmful names should be replaced, while others were vocal in their opposition. These quotes help to illustrate these contrasting views. One person said, changing names doesn't change history. Don't cancel it out. Use it as an opportunity for education and growth. While another person said, yes, if the name is offensive, we should look for a new suitable name. So now looking at the feedback frame results regarding adequate parkland and new developments. These results indicate that 80% of 169 participants agreed that adequate parkland should be a part of new developments. One resident said, parkland should be a part of life, available to everyone. So feedback on the proposed zoning framework of Draft 1 and general planning processes was identified as another major theme. As mentioned previously, we heard a wide range of views on planning, with some residents being resistant to change and protective of land autonomy, while others supporting aspects of land use planning in addressing land use conflicts, protecting the environment, and providing a sense of predictability. Many residents indicated that they want simple, flexible, and community-specific regulations rather than a one-size-fits-all approach. Some feedback noted too many zones, unclear zone boundaries, and issues with the permitted uses table of draft number 1. We also heard concerns about the enforcement of future and existing regulations, indicating a need for clear communication and understanding of how the new rules affect existing uses. Overall, there was a common theme about balance, preserving rural character while allowing for reasonable growth. So on to the last major theme, which was public engagement process. Overall, we heard mixed views on the draft documents and the engagement process, some being in support with others in opposition. We also heard calls for clear communication from staff and concerns about the sudden release of the first draft. Over time, perceptions on the engagement process did seem to shift. Earlier in the process, many expressed frustrations and outrage about the limited opportunity to engage. But as time went on, residents recognized the efforts for an in-depth public engagement campaign in order to adequately hear from residents. We also heard about some issues with plain language and accessibility concerns. Overall, many residents agreed that there is a need for inclusive, ongoing engagement to ensure all voices are reflected in future drafts, not just the vocal ones. So the following topics here on this slide were mentioned throughout engagement feedback, but fall outside of the scope of this project. While they presented here in a list, they're in no particular order. The topics of road maintenance and traffic safety did come up most often, however. MODL does not have authority over most roads, as this falls under provincial jurisdiction. This now concludes the What We Heard section of the presentation, and Ella will now go over the key takeaways and next steps.
So thank you, Rosemary and Anna. So some key takeaways. As you can see, there are a lot of topics discussed throughout this engagement, from housing and agriculture to environmental protection and to what is planning and engagement. But the major overarching takeaway was the fear of change, which strongly influenced how many people initially viewed this entire project. For communities that had never experienced zoning before, going from no regulations to full planning documents felt like going from 0 to 100 overnight. That reaction was rooted in disappointment and uncertainty, and people weren't sure what planning would mean for their land or community. Over time, through more conversations and clearer information, that fear began to slightly shift. Residents started to see that planning isn't about taking control away, but rather it's about creating fairness, clarity, and protection for the future. By the end of engagement, many residents had moved from concern to cautious support and willingness to collaborate on improving the plan. We also heard a strong call for clear communication, such as using plain language, ensuring transparency in how decisions are made, and outreach that reaches all communities, not just the vocal ones. Moreover, residents emphasized the need for balanced, flexible growth that is supporting development, that protects rural character and the environment while still allowing reasonable opportunities to grow. Housing, home-based businesses, and agriculture were top priorities throughout the engagement. Residents asked for more housing options, continued support for small and home-based businesses and enterprises, and a permissive approach to agriculture with flexibility and no animal counts limits. We also heard consistent focus on infrastructure and engagement, ensuring fair access to servicing, protecting the environment, and maintaining meaningful participation as the plan evolves. Overall, these themes reflect a community that wants growth with balance, development that protects what people love about this municipality, while planning responsibly for the future. Some next steps. So staff is looking for a direction from council, and there will be some directional council workshops, writing the draft 2, and public engagement on draft 2. And if there's any questions, public input, or questions from council, staff will be ready to answer.
I think it might be, do you want to put in your,
I think we're going to do that, the timeline after the questions.
okay. I would invite, if anyone in the public would like to speak, and I think if you want to come forward, we just ask you to come forward and convey your, we ask that you introduce yourself, make your comments, and then we're going to open it up for questions. And if you have questions then, or you want to ask your questions now, you can do that. So if you just introduce yourself, we do ask that you be respectful of all the people that are here, the staff and our counselors. And we do this in a way that we try to answer any questions that you have as directly as possible. But if we can't do that, we will record them and get back to you. But I think all the people are in the room that can answer your question tonight. So I think we should be able to do that. So please introduce yourself and where you live, and then pose your questions or your comments.
Wonderful, thank you very much. My name is Pierre Gadbois, and my wife and I, Elaine, live on Lilydale Road just outside of the city or town of Lunenburg. I've spent a lot of time in my previous life working with City Council in Stratford, Ontario, and if somebody had told me I'd be up there addressing council complaining about a rooster, I would have found that pretty strange. However, the issue that we have, I think, with the present bylaw, we moved into our house 4.5 years ago. It's a residential area, one of 5 homes on either side of the RCMP detachment in Lunenburg. They're reasonably large lots, but they're definitely not farms, and they are not considered as far as farms. The only 2 farms in the area that used to be working farms are now only used for hay and for grass. Our neighbors about a year ago, or a little more than a year ago, informed us that they were planning on buying one of those ready-made little chicken coops and get a few chickens for the enjoyment of their children, which was fine, cute, and had absolutely no objections. We found out a few months later that the little chicken coop was now being traded in for 1,500 square or 150 square foot, much bigger chicken coop being built at the bottom of the property, and they were going to add an extra 10 or 12 chickens. Again, not a big issue, not a big problem. If the kids are enjoying the chickens, well, so be it. Until the rooster appeared. Now, if you're going to raise chickens for the enjoyment of the children or for egg production, everybody knows you don't need a rooster. The rooster has the capability of screaming or crowing at between 130 to 145 decibels, which is higher than what OSHA allows in industrial applications for working without ear protection. The rooster also, contrarily to what a lot of people think, does not crow only in the morning when the sun comes up. It goes all day long. And when it's frustrated, when its owners are away, when its owners come home, when somebody drives by on the side of the road or talking or riding bicycles, a little bit like a dog would do barking, well, the rooster will crow, but it's one hell of a lot louder than a dog. And our neighbors happen to be home a couple of hours a day in the evenings. They're away most weekends, and they all work during the day, so there's nobody home. The rooster is there 24 hours a day. So our point is, we don't think that an animal as loud as a rooster should be allowed on a residential property. On a farm, on a big farm where it's needed for reproduction, it's a different story. If I were to install in my backyard a horn or a siren or any piece of equipment that made that kind of noise level, I'm sure I would have the RCMP at my front door within 2 days, and there would be something in the bylaw about protection of your enjoyment of your property, your right of enjoying where you live. There would be something that would contravene or prevent me from using my horn just to amuse myself. Why should it be different with something like a rooster, which is as loud, if not louder, than my horn would be, totally unpredictable, and runs 24 hours a day? So all we're asking, if there's a possibility of looking at the bylaw, of making the minimum size of the property larger for people owning a rooster. Chickens are fine. I mean, if people want to have a few chickens for their children or for their eggs, they don't disturb anybody. A rooster is extremely disturbing for a lot of people, enough that it can create escalations in relationship between neighbors that get to be a little drastic. And we'd like to see this addressed if at all possible. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much for making that very clear.
Thank you.
We can picture it.
You can hear it? Can you hear it?
Can't quite hear it. Anyone else that wants to speak? We'll just ask that you introduce yourself and where you live.
I'll have to put this on my resume. My name is Harold Whalen, and I live at 153 School Street in New Germany. I'll be 80 years old in July, and I suffer with post-traumatic stress, fibromyalgia, chronic fatigue, multiple chemical sensitivities, and I've been in 3 rear-end collisions, so I have a bad back, I'm sorry. And my main concern tonight is the Department of Highways has put salt on my road and ruined my well, and I've been complaining to them for 20 years, and it didn't do any good, you know. And the houses, 2 houses north of me, they've already replaced the wells. One probably 2 to 3 years, and the other probably 7 or 8. So anyway, I also live across from the school, and I have 24 buses go in this way and park, and then they come out and they go directly across in front of my house. And my, pardon me, I'm not a speaker. My old house is 80 years old or 100 years old. I don't know which. It has the original windows in it. So I get a lot of fumes that transfer through inside. And with the heat and the fires, I had a really, really bad summer. It's been recommended by my Dr. Jonathan Fox at Chronic Care that I have an air purifier put in, but housing didn't want to do that for me. So anyway, I'm here. I have an environmental illness. The environmental in New Germany this year with people that are healthy has been really, really bad. The fires behind us. I have pictures of smoke going behind my house. So it's been a very difficult summer. So I've been dealing with Kathy. Thank you very much, Kathy, and I appreciate the opportunity to voice my opinion. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I think we spoke prior to the meeting, and I know Councillor Moore is clear on what some of the steps she's going to take, and we'll follow up with that. Yeah. So at this point, we will open it up to first of all, I want to. I think that's everyone that wanted to speak has been attended to. I do want to thank the planning staff for the report, and particularly to the speakers tonight who presented, but I know that behind them stand Reed and Jeff and some of their colleagues who have moved on to other positions. There was a lot of work went into compiling all the information that we heard. And I think when you realize how many meetings and how many interactions there were between our residents and our staff and councilors, it was a lot. So to put that in in some format, some themed areas that we can focus in on as a council and provide over the next period of time some feedback on that, I think made it much more useful for us in our first step in trying to figure out what we needed to say. So I want to congratulate you on a very well put together report. It, when you spoke of making it accessible and understandable, and I think you did that very well in this report. And I think for the public, they will find this quite easy to read and to capture the main themes that were that you found in the meetings. And I think it does provide us with a very good basis. So I want to congratulate you on that. It was, I know, initially it started as a very difficult process, and all aspects of it were emotional, would be maybe an understatement in some cases. But as you said, I think in the end, people were respectful of what we were attempting to do, and we still have a lot more work to do on this, but this is the next step. And at this point, I'll open it up to council for questions and comments. Deputy Mayor Vino, you can start this off.
Thank you so much. I had an email come in from a resident, so I thought I would use this opportunity to ask. It was regarding housing and who the stakeholders were that participated in that part of the What We Heard report.
We've got that information here. Just 1 second. I'm just going to look at it.
One was Clay Radcliffe, a local architect that's involved in a tiny home, doing tiny home work. One was the South Shore Housing Action Coalition. One was a representative from Nova Scotia Health who is quite involved in housing in the area. And then we can circle back and confirm the other stakeholders.
Questions? Councillor Hubley.
Thank you. That report reflects exactly what I heard when I was at those meetings. I just have one quick question. In the surveys, when they were asked questions about home-based business or agriculture, do we know, when it comes to the agriculture questions, how many were farming on their property and how many had home-based businesses? Or was it just a general question on their opinion?
The survey didn't ask specifics in that regard. If they wanted to share that information, they could, but because the questions were sort of like an open concept, like it wasn't a necessary requirement.
Okay.
A lot of people did indicate in their survey responses about their personal experiences and things like that, but I wouldn't say we have concrete numbers on how many people actually operated a home-based business or were farming or that kind of thing.
All right,
Yeah.
thank you.
Councillor Bell.
One of the things I heard in that report is about home businesses that may operate on private roads. That is concerning to me on how we would deal with it. If an individual lives on a private road that is shared through an association fee, maybe they pay $400, $600, sometimes more, each thinking that they have so many trips a year over that road that requires maintenance. If you have one property that's operating a home business, they may have as much traffic as 3 or 4 homes. Should they be paying the same association fees? But really, that's probably a question for the association or the private group that collects the fees. But I see us being captured into a no-win situation, trying to get into that discussion. So I do think that businesses that are operating within an association private road group should be tasked with coming up with the answer rather than us having to be acting as referee. So maybe our regulations should reflect that thought somewheres so that at some future time me or some other councillor isn't trying to play umpire on whether this business should operate or it shouldn't.
Maybe I'll just, I think Councillor Bell raises a good point. I just whispered to our CAO a little bit about this, so maybe he can make a comment about because we do have, for those maybe who aren't familiar, we do have agreements between private road associations and the municipality to enable us to collect the funds and return them to the private road association. But Tom, maybe you can comment on
Sure.
that agreement and whether it could make a provision for that.
Yeah, so just a little bit of background. So the municipality permits residents that reside on private roads to form associations, and those associations then set a budget which is shared amongst all of the landowners within the area that's covered by the association. They provide a budget, the association that is, provides a budget to the municipality for things like snow clearing, and we collect that amount through our taxes and then remit it back to the association. So in setting up that arrangement, we don't look into whether there's any restrictive covenants in place in the development, which may impact private roads, but often there are restrictive covenants in developments which will or will not permit home-based businesses. But we don't enforce restrictive covenants. That's a civil matter between the property owners. So there is a way for property owners on private roads where there is restrictive covenants to take action if there is home-based businesses in contravention of the restrictive covenants. And as an aside, one of the slides indicated more parkland in new developments. Certainly, my experience is private roads are not interested in public parks, which increase the number of public residents driving on public roads that private residents maintain. And so our subdivision bylaw actually doesn't have land dedication, it has pay in lieu of land dedication. So we focus on more of regional parks on municipal property, and then we work all the way down into neighborhood parks. So our park standards guidelines does have some it is illustrative of how the municipality deals with parkland.
Councillor Smith.
Thanks so much for the report. I really appreciate the intense labor that went into this with all this consultation and being able to speak to some councillors from other rural municipalities who've been through this process. I also really appreciate that we were able to do this in-house because I think I think we had, as council, a lot more involvement maybe than some other municipalities had the capacity for. So I feel like that being in touch with the residents, the consultation, I just think it's a really quality process, and I hope that residents recognize how lucky we've been to go through a process this intense. I do have a question about the stakeholders meetings. They took place in July, so I wondered if that limited attendance at all in your view. I would love to have the stakeholder lists for all of the stakeholder meetings. I'm just really curious about that. I think in particular, I noted when I was reading the report that the only 5 participants in the development conversation, and that covered development and real estate. It just felt like maybe we were getting a kind of a view that depended on very few voices on a very large topic. So I wonder if you could comment on that. But yeah, overall, I just want to say, like, the report really does reflect what I heard, and I feel really good about going into the directional council workshops with this.
I would say that it's a right assumption to make, that some might not have attended because of summertime. It's a much more busy season. People like to go out and travel, or they're busy with their work, especially since it's development season. So I would assume that would be a correct assumption to make. We did invite way more than 5 participants, but that's the turnout. I think we can share the list if there's a need.
Just to add to that, there was additional follow-up with those larger lists. So for those who couldn't make it, they were also invited to kind of answer the same questions that those who came in person could. So we did try to capture information, even if it was somebody who couldn't come, but they still wanted to provide some feedback. Unfortunately, it wasn't as much, turnout and participation as we'd hoped, but we were really kind of limited by our timeline and getting this to this point and making sure that we did have those sessions occur before the summertime kind of really got going in August.
Other questions? Quiet. You want to?
Yeah.
There are a few slides, so.
I'll put this mic on thing. So I'm going to propose a revised timeline. So I'd like council members to keep in mind is that we started this project in or about 2020. Used to be called MODL 2040. Now it's called the Municipal Wide Planning Project because 2040 is only 15 years away. We've got a December 31st, 2026 deadline to submit our municipal planning strategy and land use bylaw to the province. We cannot meet that deadline, as everyone can appreciate. So we wanted to create a timeline that we thought would, it's aggressive and it limits some aspects of engagement because the thought was that we just went through perhaps the most complete public engagement process on land use planning that this province has ever experienced. And so we question if council's direction is still to create a land use bylaw that is very closely aligned with the minimum mandatory plan requirements as outlined in the MGA, while being reasonably consistent with the provincial statement of interest on everything but floodplains, which we will not be addressing in our MPS and LUB because we're doing a separate project on that. But if that's still the direction of council, and it appears that that's fairly consistent with the What We Heard report, with some limited exceptions around things like agriculture, watershed areas, particularly drinking water, housing, but those are statements of provincial interest as well. So they're treated a bit differently than the minimum mandatory planning sessions. We'd like council to consider this revised timeline. So I'll just quickly go through it. So we start tonight, October 27, 2025. Staff presents the What We Heard report, and I make a request for council to give direction on draft 2. My expectation is that council will say that the motion that was passed on March 25th, 2025, directing staff to prepare draft 2 that's more closely aligned with those minimal mandatory plan requirements is still the direction. If council wants to change that direction, now is the time. But my expectation is that that's not the case because that would be inconsistent with the majority of what I took from the What We Heard report. We think that 2 or 3 council workshops, each focusing on a specific topic, is what's required next. And we would have these take place from late November until mid-December. Mid-December. So December 16th would be the last day, and that's a policy and strategy meeting anyway. So we're not going to make you work past the normal, regular last council session. But I think 3 sessions will allow us to flesh out things like how many zones are appropriate, what should be in each zone, what are we going to do about lakeshore development, what are we going to do about RVs. So there's a few questions that you could see from the What We Heard report that we still have to tackle. But we think that 3 workshops with council, all in the public, would allow us the time to get direction, enough direction from council to start drafting, draft number 2. So draft number 2 would be circulated to council January 30th, 2026. We'll release it to the public on February 6th, so council will have it about a week before council, before the public, and then the council meeting on February 10th will present it. Draft number 2 public sessions, we're suggesting 1 meeting in late February 2026 and 1 meeting in early March 2026. Now, there may be a question about the number of public engagement sessions, but I again would say we've just went through massive engagement, and we're doing this during budget. And so council's time is somewhat limited, but to move forward in the winter session and meet our deadlines, we think it's acceptable to limit the number of meetings. We can still do the on-gauge, like the online engagement, the MODL website will still be effective, but we're looking at 2 meetings, 2 public meetings where we address it. And then we have the draft number 2 initial review special council meeting, April 21st, 2026, where we'll get direction from council on draft 2. Now, the plan is that council will look at that and say, well done. This does meet the direction that was given a year ago, that was because March 2025, and tell us to move it to the Planning Advisory Committee. We would put it to the Planning Advisory Committee April 23rd, 2026. The Planning Advisory Committee would send it back to council for first reading May 12th, 2026. We'd have a public hearing on either May 26th or the special council June 2nd. Not sure when FCM is taking place. So that date might have to be changed to accommodate FCM. But we have two dates and the FCM shouldn't be on both. So we think that would work. And then council's second meeting would be immediately following the public hearing. So May 26th or June 2nd, 2026. So we think that this aggressive timeline, with much less engagement than we did previously on reviewing the first draft, would allow us to present and forward a municipal planning strategy and land use bylaw to the province for consideration in or about the first part of June. It puts us past our December 31st, 2025 deadline, but only by about 6 months. And again, we will remind the province that we spent 18 months doing the coastal protection land use bylaw when they abandoned the legislation. And that in response to what we saw as a proliferation of phase development condominiums as to circumvent our subdivision bylaw, we spent a considerable amount of time doing a municipal-wide cluster regulation bylaw to deal with a problem that we requested the province address by a change in the legislation, but they refused. So we've got lots of reasons why we weren't able to meet their timeline. And I will also add that in Halifax, the criticism is planning is holding up housing development. They certainly can't say that down here because we have no planning. We are not holding up anything. If anything, the adoption of the municipal planning strategy and land use bylaw will likely slow things down. But that's by provincial design because we've been told we have to do it and we don't have a choice. So if that all makes sense, certainly open to questions on whether some of this needs tweaking. This is a tentative timeline in the sense that we might have to adjust some of the times, some of the headings may be adjusted. But what I'm looking for tonight is confirmation that the direction given March 25th, 2025 stands. Mandatory minimum planning is the goal, taking into account things that we see in the What We Heard report presentation, which was done this evening, and then an endorsement to move forward with this timeline and aim to get the council second reading by May 26th or June 2nd. And I would join the mayor. It was a great job. Tough job. Like, oh my gosh. Very challenging, but well done.
Thank you, Tom, and I'll just make a comment, and then we'll go to Councillor Bell. I think what we've done, what Tom has done tonight is really outline, and I want councillors to think about it. The general direction is to try to make this as reasonable as possible, and I think a number of you have heard me say that personally, that was my personal goal, was to try to see that we could get this through by the end of June of 2026, and we've tightened it up. There's a little bit of wiggle room in there if we got a little delayed. So this does align with something that I felt quite comfortable in talking to Tom about, because I think, and I won't speak for all of you, you can speak for yourselves, but I think we all want to see this get completed, and we have a lot of other work we want to do, and this is a big piece of what we want to get done and move on. The one thing that I will caution us all, and I think the area where we want to have some conversation is around the level of public engagement that we continue to have as we go forward with draft 2. And I think there are versions of that. There might be 2 big meetings, but I think what we found that the most constructive feedback we got was when we had open sessions here at the council office, and we invited people to come in and open that late afternoon for a period of time. That was a very constructive time for people to come to an understanding. I think there was more understanding created by that interaction than there was through some of our larger meetings, and we got good feedback from that. So I think that public engagement piece, we can work with that, but knowing full well that winter's in there too, and we may have some issues with weather and so forth. But I think what we're looking for is a little feedback on the general direction, and then that public engagement piece, I think we can work with that. I feel like 2 meetings is probably not enough, but you know, there are other aspects of how we communicate with the public that may be more productive. If we put up what the zones look like and have people come in here and pick out from the zone where they live and get some feeling around that. I don't know what it looks like, but that's a piece we can work out. So I will go to Councillor Bell, and then any other councillors that want to make some comments. Yeah, Hubley and Oikle.
Thank you. I'm very comfortable with the proposal that Mr. McEwen made to us to consider. I think that the public is pretty well satisfied that we made an extra effort to listen to them the past several months. And I also believe that the Thursday afternoons here, when Chambers was open, I know that the deputy mayor was to several of the meetings, I was to several of the meetings, and I found that it was almost like one-on-one, because we were each assigned someone to discuss and write a summary. And I think that people valued that time because they had a choice to come this Thursday or next Thursday or the one after. And it was accommodating to the public. And it wasn't necessarily a rush for making an evening meeting or something. So I do think that the June target date is can be made comfortably with still proper public discussion.
Okay. Councillor Hubley?
Thank you. FCM is June 4th to the 7th. I'm also very comfortable with Tom's proposal. I just want to make sure that with the public engagement, we do have an evening. That time frame is very important. Thank you.
And I'm also I'm supportive of it, but I want to make sure that we don't just do the basics of everything, because there were a lot of people who really had opinions about the RVs, about our agricultural issues, and the home-based business. So we would probably, I feel we need to go a little bit more in depth and more specific in those areas, rather than just doing a basic over everything. There may be the areas that we need to get more in depth to and more specific with.
Councillor Burns. Oh, sorry. Yep.
Thank you. A general comment on direction and then a question regarding the provincial timeline. I think that you've captured the general wishes of council as a whole to get towards the minimum. That's certainly my preference, but I think that it is general, and I think that if there are things that are proposed to be added in, and the conversation can be had on that on the spring. There will be some things that are added in, so I'm seeing that from the engagement. So thank you. But the starting baseline is always the framework is what we're looking for here. What I would also say is, what is the risk that we run the provincial deadline of December 31st? What happens then? What would be the likely outcome if we did that? And would it be then something in which we could then build upon, or have we, yeah, you know what I'm asking.
We're going to discuss that in more detail tomorrow in camera under litigation or potential litigation.
Understood. Thank you very much.
Deputy Mayor Vino.
Thank you. I'm safe to say I attended over 90% of all of the meetings held in the communities, the sessions here, as well as the stuff online, and have a really good grasp and feel that this report really highlights what we heard. So thank you again to staff for doing that. And while the timeline is aggressive, I am in favor, but I want to make sure that Tancook is included in that. Thank you for highlighting a spotlight on Tancook and the What We Heard report on page 89. But the vibe out there was very different. They want regulations. They want to keep things as they are. So while we go through the process, having a meeting out there is really important, and not putting them in a one-size-fits-all. And to Councillor Bell's point, the one-on-one conversations go a long way. We might not need to go out and have a big formal meeting, but we do need to go out to those residents. And while I love going out on a nor'eastern day, not everybody does, so keep in mind the winter weather and the environment that if we go in the middle of winter, what that might mean. So if we could include Tancook as a standalone meeting in this process, that would be appreciated.
I'll go to Councillor Smith, but it just, your comment reminded me of our meeting there and the idea that there might be a Tancook piece to this that's somewhat unique from the rest. And I think that's something we need to really dig in a little bit to. And there were a number of the planners that were there, and I think Tancook would be really excited to see something that really reflected the comments that they made, because it was a pretty common theme what we heard there, and to recognize that in a Tancook section of this document, I think could be really important in how well it was conveyed there and how well accepted. The issue, as I recall, was we need to really get good input from them about what it is that they want to see. So there may be a little sidebar on how we deal with Tancook.
Can I just, and one further comment, if you have information specifically about Tancook that expands beyond the one-page report, I'd love to see that if possible. Thank you.
Councillor Smith.
Thanks. I just maybe a little bit different than some of the responses. I really bristle at the minimum plus language that we're using, just because going through this whole process, I feel like we learned so much from our residents. We heard so much from our residents that to have kind of in our minds, like, what is the province making us do as minimum standards? I feel like we can kind of, not bring that to the fore, and we can say, actually, we did all this work, and we know what our residents want. And although I know that the minimum standards are still there, or the, the things that we have to address are still there and in the background, I think that there's a lot in these reports that shows that people value planning, and that planning is very useful in many situations to address situations that people are living with now and that they may be facing in the future. So, yeah, I kind of left behind, I know that we gave that direction about veering closer to the minimum, but through this process, I feel like we've amassed such feedback from residents that we don't need to be using that as the frame so much anymore. I think that I think we'll have to communicate really clearly with residents, because we did say this would go on as long as it took. Like I remember the graphics that we had at different planning meeting, at different open houses, that it would go back and forth, and I was like, this could go on forever. But at the same time, it was good to be able to say to residents, like, we're going to have to continue this until we can all live with this. So I think it's just important to say, like, yes, we're going to have to finish it by this time, but it's still a living document, and we will be revisiting things, and we can come back to it if some things just aren't working out. But anyway, that's my feedback. But I think that this timeline is doable. I hope it feels doable for the staff who've put so much in so far. But I'm on board.
And just, I think, Councillor Smith, the comment that you made at the end, that it is a living document, that we can continue to get input, we can continue to learn how this impacts our residents. And there's always the option for communities to adopt a secondary planning strategy. So if they feel very strongly that they want to have a different level of regulation on their particular area in the municipality, like Hemford Forest did. Like they came to us relatively recently and said, this is our vision for our community, and we want it raised to the level of a secondary planning strategy. And as we educate the community and our residents on those options, we may see more of those, which would actually allow us to do more focused, community-based development, which would include planning. So I think it can all tie together, and the province has made it clear that we don't have forever to do this, that there is an expectation that we get things done. But the belief is that the work that we've done, plus the aggressive timeline, demonstrates to the province that council is taking it seriously and is doing what we can reasonably achieve in the time frame that was given, taking into account that, as it was pointed out earlier, we've gone from nothing to planning, and it's a significant progression for a lot of our residents, and if we can get even at a base level in and then grow from there, we should consider that a win.
Councillor Moore.
Thank you. Can you give me the time frames again? When draft 2 looks like it's going, when does draft 2 look like it's going to be going to the public? What's the timeline there?
That's the slide.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Draft 2 released, circulate to council on January 30th. Why, okay. Is circulate to council January 30th, would that be in public session?
No, that's emailed to council.
So you have it.
Pardon me?
In the same way that we did the What We Heard report.
Okay.
Council got it in advance of the public release.
Okay.
We're doing the same here.
Okay.
Council gets it on January 30th, with a public released February 6th with the agenda package for the meeting on February 9th, the council meeting.
You mean February 10th?
Or sorry, February 10th.
So my biggest concern is what happened with draft 1 was it was put to the public just like that, and then everybody jumped on it, and then people didn't take time to read it thoroughly. I'm just wondering, I know we're on a time frame, but I'm just wondering if the public is not going to be up in arms again that it's going to be fast-tracked to a council meeting on February 10th without them really looking at it?
So that's not a decision date for council.
Oh,
That's
okay.
just council's opportunity to speak.
Okay.
Because if you can move ahead one slide. It gets back to council on April 21st.
Okay.
So there's the public release, the council release, the public release, the council meeting where it's discussed.
Yeah.
February and March, we have engagement, and then it's in front of council on April 21st, where we get direction from council on draft 2,
Okay.
which we hope will be, you've got it bang on, or it's pretty close.
Yeah.
And then to the planning advisory committee in April.
Okay, can we go back one slide? So when the public release comes out on February 6th, is there any way that a month before that, our communications could be, this is the date proposed for the public release of draft 2, so that on February 6th, people don't just get up in the morning and see it?
Yeah, we'll have a communication plan.
Yeah, let
but-
people know that is coming on February the 6th,
Well,
so they
so-
know that we're preparing them.
Yeah, my only caution is that this is assuming that all of the things that went into draft 2 took place in November and December.
Yeah, I hear you.
And that council gave us firm direction on
Yeah.
all the things we need direction on.
Okay.
And then it gives it about a month. So December 16th it's not the last workday in December,
Mm-hmm.
but it's close. So it gives almost a month to do draft 2 before it goes to council.
Okay.
Council gets to look at it a week before the public, and then it goes to a public meeting where we present it, council discusses it, public has input on it, and then we move forward on the time frame. So when we are fairly confident that that's February 6th date will be the date and not have to change, then we'll do engagement to let people know it's coming.
Okay.
As Tom has said, this is for us to think about and work through the steps. Then our next step, and that's what we need to focus on now, is the workshops, the public workshops we will have to discuss the key elements of this that we know have been top of mind for many of our residents. And then there's a couple of areas where we didn't get a lot of specific direction, and that particularly is around lakes and rivers, setbacks, buffers, all of that. We don't have a lot, we didn't get as much input on that as we did on some of the other areas. So that's one thing we'll have to really dig into a bit. But through November and into December, we will have specific meetings on the specific topics to really give direction to staff so that they can draft the next agreement. A lot of what, from my perspective, and the planning staff can tell me, but a lot of the draft 1, the introductions and a lot of the what I call the front end information doesn't really change a lot. It is when we get into the specifics, and another one big point of discussion will be how we view the number of zones that we actually designate, and then what will go in those zones, how we connect those dots, because I think that's where the next stage of people coming to us will be looking for their home or their business or their farm and say, well, where am I and what are the implications for where I live? People really tend to want to see how does it affect me, which is rightly so. And by doing that, we will be able to be quite specific. So, Reid.
Thank you. I did want to just speak to this, and Tom and I, we discussed this earlier as well. From the planning side, yeah, we believe it's a very aggressive timeline, but we think we can meet it. The only component I think I wanted to just raise is a caution around that second draft, and no one else wants to get it as much done as we do. However, this doesn't really build in an opportunity for incorporation of feedback from that second draft. So if we do go to the public and say, now we have these zoning maps, let's sit down, I'll show you what we're talking about. The way this is structured, that would be more, we're explaining to you what draft 2 looks like. This isn't not really an opportunity for you to give feedback because we haven't built in a third final draft into this plan. And so there's not really that opportunity to take that feedback from the public after they see that second draft, provide feedback on it, and then prepare a final draft based on that. So that's just, and it would be great. I think we'll try our best to really nail it with the second draft and make sure that we get all the important decisions from council, but we also can't predict exactly what the public may say at that second draft stage, and that is a little bit of a you kind of have to wait and see. But I think that's one piece where I think we would just identify as there's potential there that there's some changes you want to make, and there's a need to do another round. That's all.
And I think we're conscious of that, but I would like to think that the sensitivities of our residents, that's been made very clear to us. And I think moving from draft 1 to what we're saying is a lighter touch, which is, I think, how we can describe it, in this beginning of planning district-wide, because I want to continue, and I will, and I've said this to Tom, every time I have a chance to say it, this is the beginning. There will be more as we go through the years ahead, as our population grows, as our communities change, as the demands on communities change, and as governments change, because there may be things that we don't even know about that are going to get passed to us from someone else to manage, and we've seen that. So we have to be prepared to know that this is the beginning and that we will continue to work on it. But I would hope that we'll have good, thorough discussion with council over the next 6 weeks around the key issues, and that we're going to come very close to what's going to be acceptable to our residents. Other comments? Okay. Anything else we need to add? Anyone wants to add anything? Otherwise, we have nothing left on the agenda. I will declare the meeting adjourned, and we will reassemble tomorrow morning, council members, for our regular council meeting.